Welcome to the Chaffin Church podcast. My name is Ryan Thompson. I am joined, as always, by Pastor Extraordinaire and the world's foremost expert on orangutans, Marty Holman. Welcome here, Marty. Well, he's an expert on the noises that they make as well, of course. So, I wanted... Okay. So
I may randomly do that throughout this episode.
Sure. Let's do that. So one thing I wanted to mention, if you were listening 2 weeks ago, we started off the episode by talking about artichokes. And yesterday at the Chaffin Church weekly cookout we have, I brought a dish that included artichokes. And, I don't think it was quite as good as the previous version that had sun-dried tomatoes on it. But
it wasn't. It wasn't bad. It just something about sun-dried tomatoes has that extra pizzazz.
Yeah.
That possibly the artichokes did not.
You forgot artichokes.
I forgot what we were talking about. Yes.
Oh man.
So, anyways, they were fine, and I had one after the whole party, and you had given me two, and I put the other one in the fridge for my wife. But I enjoyed them.
So if you have not come to one of the Chaffin Church weekly summer cookouts, anyone can come. Anyone. So join us.
Every Thursday.
Every Thursday. Where's the next one? In case someone is listening on Sunday, what would Sunday be? Sunday would be the 25th. If you're listening on Sunday the 25th or up to, Thursday whatever the Thursday is.
29th.
Yes, up to Thursday the 29th. Where would the cookout be on Thursday evening of that week?
The cookout will be at one of my favorite places in the world to be. And that is at the home of our moderator and her husband, Dave and Amanda Kane.
Excellent.
And a great place. One of my favorite parties ever was at their house.
Wow.
That was at their wedding. And it was an outdoor wedding. And they have like a little barn. And so they kind of cleared out the barn. And as you know, I like barn. I like barn. And they had a tent outside the barn.
Marty and I sort of have this running joke because he loves like barn decor.
Barn decor.
Yeah, shabby chic. And I sort of take that to the extreme when I poke fun at him, and I'm like, well, why don't you just open a Cracker Barrel, And so
I today would love to go to Cracker Barrel.
Cracker Barrel.
I love Cracker Barrel.
I mean, it's okay. Okay, it's okay.
You are a son of perdition. Like cheap food that tastes great. You don't get that in New England often. Only.
You're right.
When you go to Cracker Barrel in Sturbridge or wherever else it is. Anyways, so it is at Dave and Amanda Kane's house in West Boylston. We'll be announcing the address and all that. So it's a great place to hang out and be good.
Yeah. Sounds good. So today, Marty and I were actually discussing this yesterday, and we try to think up our topic of what we're going to talk about in the podcast episode ahead of time. But this past week, we've been thinking about what we're going to talk about, and we actually thought putting just a little pinch of just sort of off the cuff spontaneity kind of. That kind of thing is what we wanted to do. So what I have done here is I have come up with 3 quotes. I have not come up with them. I have found 3 quotes, rather, that we are going to use today. And what we're going to do is we're going to do 3 15-minute hot takes on these quotes. So,
okay, before we do that,
okay,
there's a few things I need to say.
Okay.
And unfortunately, they don't have anything to do with the quotes, because I haven't even seen the quotes.
Okay.
I'm sure they're going to be great. But yesterday, I got a text message from Linda Markarian, who avidly, or I should just say Linda, who lives in Virginia and who avidly listens to this podcast. And she said this: "Hi, Marty. I just listened to your podcast. Ryan is my hero, and I'm leaving Facebook."
Yeah.
Right? Like, how awesome is that? Yeah. She made that decision. If you haven't seen the episode, it's episode 16 called "Social Media Ate My Parents." The other thing I need to say is I need to give an update on my own situation.
Yes,
so here's what I did. I ended up buying a cheaper phone, and I bought a new Apple Watch, and pretty much I don't have my phone on or around. I do have it on here because I wanted to read this. I could have just, but I haven't had my phone. I've been using my watch and haven't really been flipping at all, and I love it. And that's the way to go. Stay away from social media. Thank you, Ryan, for your knowledge in that.
That's really interesting, though. Like you've been tackling it. See, I tackled it from the social media end and kept my phone. You tackled it from the phone end and kept social media. So it's just like, it's really interesting.
I didn't keep social media on my phone.
Okay, so you got rid of the apps.
I got rid of the apps. Facebook and Twitter are not on this phone right now.
Wow.
And the third thing I want to say, and then we'll get to the quotes, is that if I have watery eyes or I yawn, it's not because you're boring. But I had a rough night of sleep last night. My 4-year-old son was up, and he didn't want to allow me to sleep during a port. And I foolishly stayed up reading for a long time until like 12:30. I have to get up at 5:45. And then at 2:30, my son woke up and wanted to get into our bed. To which I said no, or Carrie said no, whichever one of us. I couldn't. And then he got really mad and screamed throughout the whole house. So I was up for a while. So that's my story. And I apologize, dear listener, and Ryan, for any yawning or watery eyes I might produce today.
Totally fine. Hopefully, as long as we don't get any yawns from our dear listeners and viewers.
Correct.
So that I think we can forgive you for that.
Stay wild, stay beautiful, stay awesome.
I like that. Wherever that came from is a good place. I hope we get more of that today.
Came from my heart. Here we go.
All right, came from tired Marty's heart. So let's dive into the quotes here. Okay, so I have 3 quotes. So I have 3, and they progressively get deeper and deeper. Which one would you like to start with first?
I would like to start with the light and fluffy one, and finish with a deep and heavy one.
Okay, all right, then because
I'm feeling light and fluffy right now.
None of them are truly light and fluffy, but I'll start with the lightest and fluffiest one that I have. Okay,
all right.
So the first one. It is better to be occasionally cheated than perpetually suspicious. And this quote comes from we don't know who the quote comes, or I don't know who the quote comes from. If you know who the quote comes from, great, but this is an unknown quote. So I'll say it again. It is better to be occasionally cheated than perpetually suspicious.
What an interesting quote. I don't even know if I like it, because one of them is something that happens to you, and one of them is something that you do.
Right. Yes, that's definitely part of it.
It's problematic to say whether or not that's true in the first place, because it's better
to be occasionally cheated than to be perpetually suspicious.
Okay. And the actual definition, I know I throw it in there for adverbial
perpetually thought. Is like forever.
Regular.
Basically. Yeah, regularly.
Occasionally cheated. So it's basically an issue of trust.
Yes, and this is why I actually brought it up because I wanted to hear your take on it because I've actually heard Marty preach on this before.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you've said, in particularly in relation to marriages, is kind of like the happiest marriages in the world. People really work very hard to give each other the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
So, and almost to a fault. No, actually to a fault.
To a fault.
Like literally, people trust each other almost too much, and those are sort of the happiest marriages. And
Yes.
when I see this quote, it's better to be occasionally cheated than perpetually suspicious. I actually think just as a general life philosophy, that just sort of makes sense with all of your friendships, all of your relationships, right? Like, am I honoring what you have said in the past? Is that right?
Yeah,
Or-
I mean, I think I took it from the philosophy that my dear mentor, who I've talked to once actually, Andy Stanley, said, give the benefit of the doubt, or assume the best, believe the best, don't assume the worst. And that is so important in every relationship. And most people, their default is suspicious, especially, I mean, we watch enough TV, we watch enough, this is what TV and movies are built on.
Right.
Right? Our entertainment is built. If you watch drama, you understand that the things that you're watching are built on suspicion.
Right.
They're built on mistrust. And so, obviously, then we ask ourselves, okay, do I want to live my life that way? Or worse, we don't ask ourselves that. Our default moves toward that suspicion because we saw somebody cheat on TV. Certainly it's going to happen to us. Or worse yet, it happened to a family member or so on and so forth. And so,
or it happened to us.
Or it happened to us.
Directly to us.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's the hardest one. If you are cheated at some point, or if somebody hurts you, right? I think it can be really hard to trust again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, like in your previous church situation, right?
Okay.
And that whole thing, we've discussed this on the podcast
Yep,
before.
Yeah.
I mean, it must have been hard to get back to that healthy place of, oh, I can trust my leaders, I can trust my congregation, I can trust.
I'll let you know when I get there. What's amazing about that is, in the church context, is that we've come to a place in the world where almost everyone at this point has been burned by church. I mean, attendance is dropping off. I mean, people are just not going to church. And the truth is that there's not a lot of ways we can defend the church, because the truth, there are a lot of people that have done damage, probably myself included, others included. I mean, it's all over the place. However,
can you bookmark that idea? Because one of these other quotes is just bookmark that idea. Yeah, that's great.
If you can, ultimately, I think this is true. If you can begin to trust people, even on the other side of hurt, it's just healthy. I mean, that's probably what psychologists and therapists do. That's what they work on. They work on, you can trust.
And what about caveats to that? What about when a person actually is toxic in the long run, right? Like what are the caveats to that?
I mean, I think there are boundaries. The boundaries, right? So you allow people into your life, and at the same time you hold up boundaries, and then you give them permission to unpeel those boundaries. I use that unpeel. Boundaries I don't think are walls all the time. maybe they're walls for narcissists and for people who are way out there who have who have major boundary issues. But I think probably a better way to look at boundaries are like a peel, like you put up, say don't come through here. If you love me, you won't come through here, and then over time you can peel those off with permission.
Right. And then I think there's also this other element of trust. There's like artificial trust, right? Where we want somebody to be better, and so we construct this narrative in our minds that this person, let's say that we're dating, because it happens a lot in dating, we construct this narrative in our mind where this person is this great, wonderful person, and like all of our friends are like, oh, no, like, what do you, no, you're an idiot. Like, what do you, no, absolutely not. This person is awful, you know? Like, we've all dated that person before, right? Like, that our friends don't like, and that, you know, whatever. And so, I think that's sort of the other side of that too, right? Where we project trust onto an attribute that a person doesn't really have because we want them to have that attribute.
That's really good and an important point. Other people speaking into our lives is an important permission giver, right? Like people that have been there, that like when they say you really need to watch out for that person, then you really need to watch out for that person. I mean, it makes sense. And I think that the thing about trust is, and here's the hardest thing. Here's the most mature we could be. Jesus ate at a table, probably a little bit longer than this, with the one who was going to betray him.
Right.
And presumably washed his feet. And with the knowledge that that person was going to betray him, or not betray him. And how crazy is that? Like,
yeah.
That's like mature, deep stuff that most of us don't want to. I don't really want to get into. It's not where I'm at, but maybe there will come a time where I'll be called to.
And he still allows Judas to run their money, right? He's still the financial guy. And then like after that, you got Peter. He knows Peter's going to deny him. He knows all things, right?
Yeah.
So then, but he trusts Peter to run the church. He's believing the best about Peter.
Oh, come on.
Even though he sees all of his flaws, you know, and so it's a beautiful thing. Yeah. So
cool.
So that's our hot take on that one. I mean, I don't think that was quite
one.
15 minutes, but I think that works.
It was good.
That works.
It was powerful.
Yeah. So, okay, well let's go to the next one, which actually related to something that you said here, and I think this is you're gonna laugh at this. So, he who first invented the notion of defending Christianity is de facto Judas number 2. He also betrays with a kiss. Only his treachery is that of stupidity. And that is by Soren Kierkegaard, who's one of my favorite Christian philosophers. I'm just going to read that again because there's a lot in there.
Deep.
He who first invented the notion of defending Christianity is de facto Judas number 2. He also betrays with a kiss. Only his treachery is that of stupidity. And again, that's Soren Kierkegaard.
Wow. I mean, I'm trying to find it online so I can. It's powerful.
Yeah. So what do you think? Initial thoughts?
Read it one more time for me.
Yeah.
And for our audience.
He who first invented the notion of defending Christianity is de facto, and I'm just really quick, I'm going to stop and define de facto. De facto means of fact. So if you're in a de facto state of war with another country, that means you may have not declared war yet, but you know, you guys are already fighting, so you're in a de facto state of war. The facts tell you that you're in a state of war even if you haven't declared it yet. So when he says de facto Judas number 2, the facts have led to the conclusion that you are Judas number 2. So he who first invented the notion of defending Christianity is de facto Judas number 2. he also betrays with a kiss. Only his treachery is that of stupidity.
It's powerful.
I almost think like even just the first half of that. He who first invented the notion of defending Christianity is de facto Judas number 2. We could unpack that alone.
So I have always had a lot of difficulty, even though, so initially, when I was in maybe my early 20s, I first heard about the idea of, not first, but I first really got into the idea of apologetics.
Yeah.
Right? And over time, I began to really think poorly of the idea in general. Like, wait a minute. Jesus didn't defend anything he did. So why are we taking the time to defend? And it seems like the more that apologetics and the more defense of what we believe gets out there, the more vile is poured on the likes of the Christians as a whole. So I would say Kierkegaard is spot on in terms of this. It is very, very. I mean, Judas number 2 seems pretty intense, but yeah, you're basically not destroying Christ per se, but you're hurting Christianity, you're hurting the Christian witness by your defense. Wow.
Right. And so now Kierkegaard, again, so this is a 19th century Danish philosopher. Right?
Yes.
So it's really interesting how quickly he comes to this idea, because this is like 150 years ago. He's talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's almost like I have found as well the same that you have. Like, it's almost like if you had some yogurt in your hand and you're like, I'm gonna press this yogurt in my fist, and I'm gonna press it down, but you can't. The yogurt is just gonna come through your feet. The tighter you grip, the more it's gonna slip through your fingers. And I feel like that's what happens a lot of the time when like those debate stages, right? That you get up on in high school if you're on the debate team or whatever. Like, that's not real life. Nothing is that artificial and devoid of a person's culture and beliefs. Because remember, in most debates, you are assigned your side like beforehand. You may not even agree with it a lot of the time, And so, so I just think like if Christianity is a viable option to begin with, right? Like, if this idea of following Jesus works,
yes,
then it has to be able to stand on its own. It has to stand up to scrutiny when a person looks at it on their own.
Yeah. Two thoughts I have on this. Kierkegaard believed that Christianity, if it was the same I'm thinking of, wasn't necessarily a doctrine to be taught, right? Like, I could teach you this doctrine.
Right.
But it was a life to be lived.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Like that's kind of where he was coming from. And I look at our Savior, right? And there were systems in place on Jewish thought. And those systems were all well laid out. I mean, the systems built up these large systematic rituals, whether it was sacrifices,
right,
temple living. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with symbols, but when those things come down to systems, Jesus clearly not only called them out, but also forced them out in certain situations.
Right.
But then he moved past that, moved past staying in that area, and he went out and lived his life. And that's such a powerful idea, that we can live our lives of Christianity. And really, we in church, right? The temptation, and I've been thinking about this in the last few weeks, the temptation is to get people to come to your church, is to do your thing. Like, oh, come be a part of my thing. When really the church should be called to push out and to teach, instead of doctrine, hey, how do we live this life out together, both in community and individually?
Right.
And to me, that's such a powerful thing when we can not defend our faith, but maybe offend with our faith, not by our words, but our actions. I think of Martin Luther King Jr., who stood and gave his life for, yes, his words were offensive, because sometimes the words of justice are offensive, but calling people to vie for justice and mercy, right?
Right.
And these are obviously clearly Christian things. And so, to me, that's way more important than defending particular systematic theologies. And it always has been. I've never really liked the idea of systematic theology, although it has been big in America in the last several hundred years.
Right. But it almost begs the question, like, what is Christianity, right? Like, it's not just this collection of ideas, right? And that's a part of it, you know. Yeah. But Christianity is a movement, right?
It's a movement that is spoked. I think that's the best word. Not spoken, but spoked, with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that allows us then to be a new creation and to usher in God's kingdom.
Yeah. Exactly.
Christianity is a catalyst, not an end game. That may be heretical to some. It's okay if it is. But it's kind of where a lot of my current mentors have brought me, like N.T. Wright and others.
But it can feel good, right? Especially when we're young in our faith, you know, and I think Soren Kierkegaard gets into this. He says he also betrays with a kiss, right? It feels good to defend Christianity, you know, especially when you're first a Christian. You know, you're so passionate about your relationship with God and everything a lot of times, and how do we resist that temptation when someone who is, you know, struggling along with their faith, you know, says something like even something basic, like, hey, there's no God. Anyone believes that, it's just foolish, you know. Like, how do we resist being like, well, actually, you know, in the Bible it says, you know, only in a fool's heart it says there is no God, right? Like, how do we resist that, you know?
I think perhaps and I don't know if it's a better analogy, but maybe a different analogy can be found in John 18, and when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Judas has done his betraying, and Peter draws his sword and slashes off the right ear of the high priest's slave, Malchus. And Jesus says to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Shall I not drink from the cup of suffering the Father has given me?" And I think it's not just Judas, but it's also Peter, right? Many of us desire to fight. I do. To fight for our Christianity, to fight for. But it's not really. Like, I've thought about this for a while. Like, there's been a big debate over whether certain people can say things from a pulpit, whether those things should be 501c3 protected in terms of taxes, right?
Yeah.
And I've taught the gospel and preached the gospel, and I don't think I've ever come close to saying something that would offend or take away the government's
Right.
Now, something could change, right? However, in our current situation, all the government typically is saying is, don't be a jerk and don't be hate-filled in your speech to other people. And there's clearly a line from what some pastors are preaching about, let's say, the LGBTQ community. And there are times that there are pastors that say things that have been completely hate-filled. I have a right. I'll teach the Bible. I've heard some of those pastors preach from a pulpit, and they take what the Bible might say, literally, okay, so there's that, and then they go off on all of these other things. And anyways, I just think the desire to feel big and strong and powerful is human and not Christian. It's natural and not supernatural. The supernatural thing is to lay down our rights, is to essentially do what Paul said and said, I'm a slave for the gospel.
Yeah, the church has been obsessed with winning and victory, wrong kind of victory. For a long, long time. And clearly, Kierkegaard lived in a Western nation, Western European nation in Denmark, and so clearly, yeah, that's been around for a very long time.
Yeah,
for sure. So I think that's enough for that hot take. I mean, but that quote, that's one of my favorite quotes actually, because whenever I want to, respond to, a Facebook post, or a friend is talking to me about how they're struggling with this idea, or I have many atheist friends, and when they talk to me about what they think about Christianity, and occasionally, I get the idea in my head. I'm like, oh, I need to act on it, and then I'm like, you know what? No, I'm gonna let this person wrestle with this idea. I'll explore that with them. I'm not gonna, like if they say, hey, all churches are evil, I'm not gonna not ask them, like, well, what do you mean by that? What's been your experience that has led you to believe? We can unpack things, but I don't need to be like, hey, you're wrong, bro. Why are you saying that? We don't have to go there.
Well, I do think that one of the problems with Christians not viewing Christianity as a catalyst, but viewing it as an end game, is then, or even viewing it apologetic, having to defend everything, then people like atheists, right? Then they are forced to play that game, and do, right? And Jesus wasn't having a ton of conversations with a ton of doubters, or at least it didn't talk about it in Scripture. He was having these intense conversations with the spiritual people of the day. And I think that is just a really important point, that he wasn't asking us to lambaste people who were sick. Like people who needed a doctor. And I don't mean to say that demeaningly, like you're sick, right? I mean that generally in a spiritual way. I believe that when people are living out their natural urges, it can easily become dysfunctional. That's for Christians too. If we live out our urges to fight back, to prove them wrong, to win, that is someone who is sick. And Jesus called us beyond that.
Yes.
Boom!
That is
I win!
That is a hot take. Okay, well, that sort of leads us into our third quote here, and it's actually interesting how all these ideas are sort of relating to one another here.
Okay.
All right. I believe that the Bible does not model a faith that depends on certainty, for the simple fact that the Bible does not provide that kind of certainty. Rather, in all of its messy certainty, the Bible promotes trust in God. I'm going to read that one more time. I believe that the Bible does not model a faith that depends on certainty, for the simple fact that the Bible does not provide that kind of certainty. Rather, in all of its messy certainty, the Bible promotes trust in God. And that quote is by Peter Enns, one of my favorite theologians these days.
Yeah. I think Peter is spot on. We are Facebook friends. I know you are not Facebook friends with him, but I am. No.
Are you actually Facebook friends with Peter Enns?
Yeah, I think we became Facebook friends through Seth, our good friend Seth.
Oh, that's right. That is where I encountered him, actually, now that I'm thinking. I'm like,
yeah.
I sometimes I don't remember where I encounter ideas or authors, but yes, that is where I encountered it.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of certainty is a highly modern thought process, right? We can know everything. It's the Enlightenment. We can, and so, that's when you get into literalism in Scripture.
What is literalism? What is that?
When you take the Bible literally, and then you have to decide which parts you're actually going to take literally, which parts you're not.
Marty and I routinely sort of make fun of this idea. So if you are taking the Scriptures literally, we would ask you, if you said, hey, I take the Scriptures literally, we would ask you, okay, so when it says David, took a bath in his tears, do you really believe David was able to cry enough to fill a bathtub up with his tears? Yes or no? Okay, you say no. Okay, now you have just interpreted the Scripture in a non-literal way. So
Right.
you are no longer reading the Scriptures literally. Sorry,
Yeah. And there's plenty of metaphors and, right, and all that, and similes in Scripture and analogies, poems. And it's funny what in our Western world what we chose to like. I believe wholeheartedly that the creation story is a biblical poem. I mean, at this point, it's kind of hard not to believe that.
Like, do you honestly believe that the ancient Israelites were ready for, or even wanted a scientific explanation of exactly how the earth was created? No, clearly not.
Yeah. And so now the hard thing about this, and we just talk about certainty versus trust, because I think certainty is actually the opposite of trust, right? So we've built a system in our modern world that directly opposes trusting God, and we've said this is how you trust in God. But I think that trust comes. I actually get excited in some way when I hear that America is no longer becoming a Christian nation. Is no longer a Christian nation. Not because, it sounds weird to even say that out loud, but, and I guess getting excited is, I guess I feel challenged a little bit because I feel like we've taken the spirit out of Christianity, and I grew up in a world and have continued in some ways to grow up in a world where I've given certainty instead of trust. And I don't know what that might look like. I think this is going back to the first quote. When you believe in something, you don't need, going back to the second quote, you don't need to have 18 different reasons why you're right and they're wrong. You just believe something, and then out of that emanates, and what we believe is the Spirit of God to give you the fruits that allow the world to be changed and to become, you are a new creation. And so that looks way different. That doesn't mean we don't talk about it, right? It doesn't mean we don't talk about it and preach about it and give good news. And it doesn't even mean it's always about, what's that dude's name in tech? Joel Osteen. Like everything's like, hey, how are you? Yeah, there's some prosperity stuff there that I don't think is gospel. But yeah, I think to live life in a world of uncertainty is certainly nerve-wracking. But that's the scriptures.
Yeah.
Like their stories were so big and crazy, and they stepped out of their little safe like lives to live bigger lives, to live trust lives, and
right. Yeah, I completely. I think to trust in God, it actually takes us completely off of the certainty versus uncertainty scale. Like you are there is no longer, you're no longer even on the same, that's not even the same category. Like,
yeah.
And so actually when I was in seminary, one of my professors told me a story of these two rabbis. So one was, this story, he got it from someone else. I think it was a third rabbi, but I can't totally remember. But basically, both rabbis died recently, and so the first rabbi brought all of his disciples and his family into the room where he was on his deathbed, and he lifted up his hand. He lifted up both his hands, and he said, "Hey, I want you to look at these hands." So everyone's looking at his hands, and he's like, "Neither of these hands have touched sin. So, I'm going to go to be with God now. I've been a good and righteous man." And he died. And then there was a second rabbi who died around the same time. And so he brought all of his disciples and his family in, and he said, "Oh my goodness, like I didn't do this. I didn't capitalize on this. And, I really, mucked up this situation. It was awful. I didn't do the right thing. And I just feel horrible about that. And you know what? I'm starting to think about this, and I think God is going to smite me. Like when I die, I just, this isn't gonna end well for me. And like, I didn't do enough good. And then he died, And so, and my professor was kind of talking about, our trust in God, right? Needs to be somewhere between these two rabbis, right? Like we can't, because the first guy, right, with his hands, my hands are clean, right? I mean, part of that is he's saying he's trusting in God, but really he's sort of trusting in himself more than God, right? My hands, these hands have not touched sin, but see, he's off the trust scale because he's certain.
Right.
There is no trust there. He's just certain, And but then this other guy, right? Maybe he has tried to trust God, but he is uncertain. He's also off the trust scale, Like he is just uncertain, doesn't, and he's just like kind of awash in the waves of fear that came along with him for what was going to happen with him and God, when he died.
Yeah.
And so I think like what Peter Enns says here, the Bible, he believes the Bible does not model a faith that depends on certainty for the simple fact that the Bible does not provide that kind of certainty, And so just getting off of that certainty scale and getting over to actually trusting in God. I think it's a hard thing to do, like, because I think a lot of people, they want on some level to come into a church and maybe or maybe not take part in an altar call, but essentially it boils down to assenting to these ideas, to saying, this is what I believe, and then they never want to touch it again because, okay, I said I believe this, I'm good,
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's not trust. That's you're just checking a box, right? And so it's not a principle of certainty that we're after as Christians. It's
Right.
it's the principle of trust.
So, what is something you have done that you would say, this is me acting on trusting God?
Well, one of the big things is, and you were there, especially early on in my friendship with you. I was pretty systematic in my theology. I had
Okay.
these strong beliefs about what it meant to be a Christian, that were very, very, theological. And by the way, if you're wondering, what makes a theology systematic, essentially it's like the theologies, they rely on one another, and some of them are not directly in the Bible, but we infer them, based on other truths, and
Yeah.
we sort of fill in the gaps. But the problem is with most systematic theologies is that it's sort of built like a brick wall,
Yeah.
and you pull a brick out, and then half the thing falls down because it's not designed to have a brick pulled out. You can't
Right.
you can't even pull a brick out and examine it, right?
It's like spiritual Jenga.
Exactly. So it's pretty horrible in terms of that. And I've been reading a book, back in the day, by one of my favorite theologians. His name is Rob Bell, and he was talking about the virgin birth. Now, I believe in the virgin birth. I think that's a reality. But Rob Bell, he said, he's like, I believe in the virgin birth too. But like, what if there was some like archaeological evidence unearthed that it was not immaculate conception, that Jesus was fathered by some dude named Larry, right? So what do you now, that for a lot of people that's sacrilege, and if you're thinking that as you're hearing this and you're cringing, I'm sorry. I cringed too when I was reading it. I literally was like, gritting my teeth as I was reading
myself,
it. Yeah, you were probably doing the same thing, right? And so, but I had to think. I started to think about things that way, like, can I pull this brick out and examine it? And if I pull it out to examine it, does the rest of my faith fall apart? That was a huge thing of trust for me. Getting away from these very, very particular theological ideas.
Yeah.
And trusting God with that journey.
Yeah.
That was huge. And of course there are other more like obvious ones, like sometimes you believe God is telling you to move across the country, or to start a new career, even if it pays less, because you believe more in what it does. There are so many examples, but for me that was a really big thing, because I had built this up in my mind, and I had those ideas kind of front and center. How about you?
It's good. Wow. So I like to change for these types of things. I like to follow after what I believe God wants in a scenario. And one of the things we'll bring up is the move that we made from Fellowship to Showcase North.
That was a big one.
It was a huge step.
We did not know it was, if it was going to work.
Right. And on this side of things, right? It's interesting. Thinking about, like we did a community dinner. We were talking about the community dinners yesterday. We used to do community dinners.
Yeah.
Right? Cookouts. And there would be upwards of 75, 90, 100 people at some of those. And yesterday, we're at a smaller church. We're kind of building something up here, a different scenario. But all of those people are somewhere. Right? Those aren't my people. Right? I don't mean that in like, those aren't my people. I mean that in people are God's. They're not my people. Even the people that go to this church are not my people.
So like God''S.
Yeah. Yes. They are God's. And so really, what even that for a pastor is trust, right? How many people I come to a church, coming to my church on Sunday? That's not trust. That's systematic.
So for you, it's like trusting God with your flock as a pastor, right?
Trusting God with the flock. Another thing that we did that has been a huge trust thing is we adopted 2 kids, right?
That's a big one.
And
Yeah.
it's huge, especially as they get older, and I begin to see the differences in how they react to me than the other 2, my twins.
Right.
And it's 2 totally different things. Now, eventually they're kids, so they could all switch
Right.
But for now, it looks like a big heaping pile of trust. And so, but they're precious and wonderful, and I believe that God used my wife in that scenario to help spur me on to have a soft heart for others who are not in my particular family, right? And so those are some instances. My time coming here, I had a job offer with a lot more pay, which was full time in this town. It's the same distance from my house and everything. And so I just felt like this is where God wanted me and my family and those who are around me. And I haven't regretted that since. There have been times when I wanted to punch somebody in the face, but it was never you. And so those are some times. And it's hard because we're not always seeing blind people see. We're not always seeing the dead rise.
Right.
But there are things that are happening, and I even think I'm even believing that as I put away social media, that I'll begin to see my trust grow as a result of that decision.
Yeah, well, that's. I mean, it's sort of like the whole farming analogy we see in the Bible hundreds of times, right? Like, not every day is the harvest, right? When you're farming, it's 364 days of the year are just hard, backbreaking labor, and a lot of those days you don't even know if we don't know what the weather is going to bring or what.
Right.
And farmers today, even with our modern farming techniques, we're still at the mercy of the weather, right? So it's very.
I'm sorry, farmers, this year, that's for sure.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's a whole other thing. But if you could wrap up, what do you think? So the 3 quotes. What is if one thing could tie them all together? What do you think it is?
I think building your life on a foundation of trust is a powerful, powerful thing. Not trusting every person and God with everything you can to the amount appropriate. So in other words, God you can trust with your whole life. Believe that. Yeah. I believe that. If you're a Christian, go after that. Not what somebody says you should trust. In other words, we didn't ask you to throw away your social media in a fire like they used to with teen groups in the 70s with their music, right? That's not trust. That is obedience to a youth pastor or a pastor, right? Follow after God with everything, and when He leads you and when He guides you and when you kind of come to that realization that He's doing that, you can trust that's going to be good. Hard, but good. Humans, you will live a more joy-filled, peace-filled life when you trust the people around you as much as they allow you to. doesn't mean you trust everyone with everything all the time, right? People hurt, people abuse. So when those things happen, you do something functional and put up those boundaries we talked about. But I think just living that life of trust is a powerful, powerful thing, and really trying to understand what trust is.
It's so weird, like that, so good, so good. And I was not like picking these, and they weren't totally at random, but I was like, I have this list of quotes that when I see them in books or even online or whatever, I just pull them into, I have this big, long Evernote. It's huge, but I just pulled 3. I'm like, oh, this would be cool to talk about. This would be cool to talk about. And like, I wasn't thinking like, oh, there's trust in 2 of these, so I'm gonna
3 of these.
Yeah, well,
I think there's trust. Yeah.
So so I just want to kind of capitalize. One thing that Peter Enns actually said. So that third quote, the second half of the quote, the term that I love that he uses throughout his book, I forget what it's called right now, is messy certainty. That's sort of like what he says. The Bible provides sort of, it doesn't provide, certainty. It's not entirely unclear. So it provides this like messy certainty. And I think much of the time that is the feeling evoked when we know we have to trust someone for something to be healthy, trust someone or something for our lives to be healthy. We have to have this sense of messy certainty. I don't have all the details, right? But you know what? I'm pretty sure this is right, and I'm gonna do this because I trust,
Yeah. Rick McKinley called that the beautiful mess.
The beautiful mess. I like that too. I like that too. Just those two messy certainty, beautiful mess. I like when there's two words kind of juxtaposed next to each other.
Yeah.
So that's our hot takes for today. Do we have any announcements or anything like that?
We're coming up on, don't forget the Canes Community Cookout.
That is this Thursday. If you're listening to this, the week of the 25th or 6th, depending on which day you start your week.
Yeah. And then a couple announcements for the ladies. Shine Conference is the 9th to the 11th of September. You can go to shineconference.com or you can find it at chaffin.church, the site to register. But make sure you do that. We'll probably also have a sign-up sheet at church on Sundays as well. But you can also make sure to do that at chaffin.church. Also, on August 15th, which, by the way, is a week before my birthday, I've decided it's going to be a big month-long celebration.
Let's do it.
I just decided that recently. August 15th is a ladies' board game night here at 155 Shrewsbury Street. And there's going to be lots of good times. That cost, and there's going to be pizza and a few other special things, is going to be $10. You can register for that also at chaffin.church, August 15th at 6 o'clock p.m. It's a Sunday night. So we're essentially creating a Sunday night service, Ryan. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, let's do it. So husbands, get your wives there.
Get your wives there, husbands. And beyond that, don't forget that you can give to Chaffin Church, and we're thankful for those of you who call Chaffin Church your home. You can give at chaffin.church/giving, or you can text any dollar amount to hashtag, is it pound or hash?
No, there is no hash. It's just 84321.
4321. Or you can also send any giving to 155 Shrewsbury Street, Holden, Massachusetts 01520. And we would love it if you enjoyed this podcast and enjoy Ryan and I's banter and conversation, and anyone else who may be here. We would love it if you could subscribe at Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube or even chaffin.church, and give us a rating or subscribe to it. We love that if you could be a part. We always love to continue the conversation throughout the week. Look at that, 20 seconds to go.
Also, I'm just gonna throw this in.
All right, guys, have an awesome.
let's, if you have any questions that you might like us to answer on a future episode of the podcast, why don't you go ahead and message us those. You can send those to chaffinchurch155@gmail.com, or you can comment them on YouTube or anything. They don't necessarily have to be super theological questions, like questions for a pastor, but they could be any sort of cultural questions as well. But we'll take anything you got. Can't guarantee you we'll answer it on the podcast, but we'd like to see the questions you have.
Yeah, thanks so much. And this has been good news. Now go.
Give some out.